Hi all! Today we're going to be doing a nice, short and sweet video on how cover works in Star Wars Legion. Surprisingly, it is a very straightforward system. The most recent cover changes were very much controversial, so let's go into the depth of all the cover options Legion gives and why my local group specifically and some of the internet found it a bit controversial. I personally think that the current cover meta is fine. It does bring a unique feel to Legion, and it all makes sense and works together pretty well. Starting with the basics. Cover can be light and heavy. However, that is determined can break into how line of sight works. So, we'll get into that more in the line of sight section. There are three types of terrain: scatter, area, and obstacle. Scatter terrain are crates, barricades, different little things you would toss on, overturned speeders, etc. Area terrain is a term for multiple elements inside a footprint, like a forest or a ruined crater with a crashed vehicle, or a ruined building with a second floor. Obstacles are high walls, cliffs, or buildings. Terrain can also be difficult terrain and restrict movement. That is something you decide as a group, and if it does restrict movement, all it does is make your move 3 a move 2, your move 2 a move 1, and move 1 stays at move 1, because you can't go any lower than a move 1. Moving over terrain might as well be something we work on real quick as well. When a unit moves through terrain and it is considered difficult, you reduce the speed by 1. Units can move through obstacle terrain that is shorter than their silhouette. However, if they want to move on to something greater than that, they must climb. And the image on the right kind of shows how climb works. Use the speed 1 tool always and move like normal, and you can climb a max of height 1 terrain at the start of your move. And the height being the little stick. Other things will allow you to climb more or less, but in general, that is what I mean when we say moving over terrain. Now, how is cover determined? The players decide before the game begins what kind of terrain each piece is. You have the three categories: light, heavy, and no cover, technically. Light cover has a value of 1, heavy cover has a value of 2, and no cover is 0. You are in cover if the line of sight from the attacking unit is broken by cover or terrain. This step is repeated for every minute in the unit, and if half or more units in the defending unit have broken line of sights, they are in cover. Line of sight is drawn from the unit leader. After that, the type of cover is determined. If more minis are covered by light than heavy cover, then you get light cover and vice versa. So that way, if you have people hiding behind crates and a barricade, if you can see more people behind the crates than the barricade, you're in light cover. Cover does not stack. You cannot be in both heavy and light cover at the same time and get both benefits. You choose. Am I in light or am I in heavy? So, you have determined cover, so what happens now? Light cover means you autosave 1 dice. So if an enemy hits you twice, you only roll 1 dice. Critical ignore cover, so do keep this in mind. So if they roll a critical, you can't just say, I ignore that critical if that's the only hit. Heavy cover means you autosave 2 dice, which is very nice. And you can only ever save 2 dice with cover, no stacking cover. And this includes suppression. Suppression can also give you the benefit of cover, but you max out at 2 cover. Just because you have 3 suppression doesn't mean you remove 3 auto saves. Now I'm sure hearing all this, which took me less than, 3 minutes to describe, your first thought is, why is this a problem? Why is it controversial? It is super straightforward. You are absolutely correct. It really is not a big problem, but it is different than it was before. Before, the unit leader was the only unit that mattered, and height could also play a bit more of a role in cover as well. So the current main issue is line of sight, at least with vehicles. It's what my group disliked the most. Line of sight is determined by a silhouette, not by the mini itself. So if an ATST shoots at an enemy, its height lets it see without cover. That doesn't matter, as the silhouette is determined by the base itself. This leads to situations where the ATST can see the enemy in instances where it shouldn't by logic. My group 3D printed terrain, and one of them is a Hoth setup with 2 bunkers that the ATST should not be able to see into, but it can because of silhouette rules. This is, in my experience, the crux of the issue. The rules are unintuitive at times. This can be fixed by proper communication, but it can still be an issue. And why is this a cover meta? Because it can be abused in interesting ways. For instance, you can daisy chain out a unit leader a little bit so they have line of sight on an enemy unit that negates their cover advantage, but does not work if the enemy shoots back, because most of your unit is behind cover, just your unit leader is the one who can kind of see around. This used to be prevented before, because the unit leader was what determined cover. So if your unit leader was in cover, then that's all that mattered. But now that it's your unit, not your unit leader, even though it makes a bit more sense that way, it does not negate that problem anymore. This can lead to heavy cover being camped behind, and unit leaders moving to positions kind of a little farther away from the unit as far as they can get at least. Also, as I previously said, suppression can be used to improve cover by 1. So keeping a suppression and using it to make light over cover heavy, make light cover heavy cover, or make no cover heavy cover, it's good. If you have suppression, you pretty much have cover wherever you go and get that benefit. Now, you have to have a unit that has enough courage, or can get enough courage to stay like that, though this is one of the many ways it can be abused. Now let's briefly go into how to negate cover. There are so many ways you can cover, so how do you stop it? The big reason is to use your unit leader to be properly positioned to ignore some cover while your unit is in cover. There are certain keywords that ignore cover, but they are few and far between. The big thing is to fish for critical hits and use abilities or cards that give surge to crit. Melee completely ignores cover, so that's always a good bet. And the Geonosians have an ability that ignores cover as long as they are height 1 above cover, which is one of the first new instances to do it. Now, I am going to take a minute here to discuss why I think there's a bit more controversy behind cover itself. Cover in Legion has had an interesting life cycle, and some people don't like camping behind cover as much. Like I said, I kind of like it. I like this system. It's unique among other war games, and there's nothing else I play other than maybe Bolt Action that handles cover as similar to this one. I like the idea that this is a war game that encourages actually using the terrain in cover for good instances. And while the line of sight profiles can be very annoying, I mean, you are seeing the line of sight templates right now on screen. Technically, a vehicle does not have a line of sight template. It is a cylinder going up, which is why, it's like this. And while technically, vehicle line of sight did not work the other way I talked about before, it is how my local group kind of seemed to encourage it to be done, and it was just fun to play with people, and we are super casual. And now we do follow these rules because even though there are times when logically it doesn't make sense, it still is better for game balance. The biggest issue with these line of troop sight silhouettes, though, for the troopers, is the little bit of outreach. There are times when your mini is not modeled that way, but technically speaking, you should be visible. And that is where it gets a little bit metagamey and a little bit annoying. Because, the silhouette, they can see part of it, I have line of sight on you, even when you shouldn't. This is where minor, and I emphasize on minor, issues can arise. All that being said, this will really only happen if you play against an absolute jerk. I feel like this is where most of the complications and misunderstanding in my local group arise from, is people not understanding how the silhouettes work. So more often than not, they're kind of just ignored or not paid as much attention to, and it also makes cover feel more complicated than it is because you have to keep this in mind. Also, compared to the old rules, these are so much more intuitive, not even close. Most of the cover controversy I have experienced has been at the casual play level. The basic cover system itself is very straightforward and makes sense. It's a line of sight system that confused a lot of people more than it did before, and I personally like the cover system. I just wish the line of sight system was more intuitive. That being said, compared to what it was before, this is better and more intuitive. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Next video is going to be some holiday buy guide stuff. I'm going to start with the Galactic Civil War era and the Clone Wars era and get the first 2 Saturdays of November out of the way that way. After that, a couple of the video ideas I have in the work are finally finishing that how to play video. It should be out before the end of the year. I am just figuring out how to make it right because I'm putting way more effort into it than anything else, and at this point, I feel like anything I do will not be what I want it to be, but it is what it is. I will also be putting videos out on lesser known Legion rules, or rules that seem to be ignored more often than not, at least in my casual play experience. Again, I do have a group that has a bit more homebrewish aspect with rules at times that I play with, so I might have a different experience than you. I hope all of you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you all for 1,000 subscribers, and I'll see you all next week.